All right. Well, thank you everyone for being here today. This will be a 30 to 40-minute moderated discussion. We're just going to talk briefly about player performance. How do you maximize it? And then with the ever-increasing amount of matches being played, what can we do from a recovery standpoint to make sure that players are being looked after from a health and wellness standpoint? I think a conversation like this probably has to start with the player's perspective. So, Alejandro, throughout the course of your career, I think it's probably fair to say you've seen more and more games get packed on to a player's annual footballing calendar. How do you protect yourself? What do you do to look after your body from a health and wellness standpoint?
Yeah, I mean, I think there was a period, of like 4 or 5 years when I was playing overseas in France, and playing with the national team, where the longest break I had was 16 days of proper off season. So just to maintain my body, I'm lucky. Actually, I got like a little cheat code. My wife happens to be a physio, so I get some extra treatment at home. But around nutrition, I think, you're going to speak about it later, but for me, the key for me has been, I use the word moderation. I think that's what's worked for me. Everybody's different. But for me, I tend to eat, kind of a well-balanced meal, I'm a type of player that covers a lot of ground on the field. Yep. So, from a food standpoint, my diet is just, I pretty much eat everything in moderation. I think for me, sleep is very important. I do tend to take a lot of naps, before the big games, and everything like that to get my body a proper rest. And just, always staying hydrated, I think one of the things that for me now as I've gotten older too is I've made sure to just drink loads of water, and I've seen that has helped me with my recovery and my ability just to keep performing. And as I've gotten older, load management, I think it's a big word. I don't know, you'll probably maybe use it. But for me, in training sessions now, with all the data that we have, that we wear, these sports bras and stuff that tracks all our accelerations and our distance covered, I make sure that I talk with the performance person at my club, and that he feeds me back that data and lets me know how much I've done during the week and during that training session, so that I know that the next day or the next week I can have that personal relationship with the coach. Yep. To better manage my body.
Yep. And Julian, you don't have the luxury of necessarily being around the group every single day. National team players come and go, different camps, different pools of players come in. How do you manage the sort of inability to effectuate what's occurring on a day-to-day basis? I imagine there's a lot of information sharing, is that right?
Yeah, I mean, that's probably the big point, as you mentioned, about load management, things like that. We obviously are in touch with the clubs. The more communication we can have, the more information we get, the better we can help prepare the players. So more and more games, so on and so forth. That information then lets us know where that player is coming into camp. So if the player's been playing a lot of games, that's not necessarily always a bad thing. It means that, okay, they're fit and ready to play those games. Because sometimes the word load management for a lot of people means, oh, we need to rest more and all the rest of it. That's not necessarily always the case. These players adapt to this stimulus, get used to it. And sometimes it's the opposite. If the player hasn't been playing a lot, then they're not fit enough and ready to play a lot of minutes. So it kind of, the sharing the information to help manage those loads is absolutely key for us.
Yeah. And John, you've made a career in this space. You've built a company, and your sole focus of that company is making sure that players are looking after themselves from a health and wellness standpoint and recovering to the best of their ability. Tell us a little bit about Totem and what your mission is.
Okay, so I'd like to think that we're one of the few companies in the space that actually deals with recovery and hydration at a cellular level. And basically, I agree with both what you said there about nutrition and about load management and everything else. But there are problems in today's nutrition in that they don't have the same nutrients that they had 20, 30 years ago. They say that you need to eat 16 apples today to get the same nutrition as one apple, 50 years ago, and that's where food is going. So we actually we go back to the base. We go back to where we consider life is at the bottom of the food chain, and we look and we go to the place on Earth where every single mineral that your cell needs is found there. So we actually harvest the product in specific parts of the ocean under plankton blooms. Now I say under because basically there's a plankton, what they do is they eat inorganic, unbioavailable minerals, they put it through their digestive system and they excrete it. And we then harvest underneath. So there's a lot of science behind this, and we've got about 100 years of evidence-based documentation and so on to show that our product is working at a cellular level. And our commitment to that is that when you get your body working at a cellular level, when you get your cells fit, then it can do a lot more with food, it can do a lot more with recovery, it can do a lot more with training, it can do a lot more with management. And that's the space we're coming from.
It's interesting. And Derek, you're with the Charleston Battery. A little known fact about the Charleston Battery, they're the longest continuously run soccer club in the United States. So there you go. Given the demographics of the league, you tend to work with, it lends itself towards working with younger up-and-coming players. I guess the best question for you is, what are some of the key factors that you're looking for, especially during those very important developmental years?
I think this is one of the areas where it really does need a lot of work, both through education, through the soccer coaches courses. I think it needs a lot of attention, because if you look at the average youth kid, they can play 3, sometimes 4 games in a weekend. They'll play sometimes 3, 4 games within 24 hours. And, you know, if you look at the habits that they have in between those games, you know, they could play a game at 8:30 in the morning, have they had breakfast, then they'll have another game at, say, 2 o'clock, and then, you know, what they're going to eat for lunch, they're probably eating on the move. Some parents have multiple kids. I think it's great when you're in national programs and when you're in Charleston Battery elite programs. To me, where I think the biggest education needs to come is into the general youth population, because that's where these great players come from. And right now, I'd like to see a lot more attention given it through to coaching education and parent education. As I said, I'm sure that the high-end athletes get the best of everything. You know, what we try and do, you know, like most coaches, we try and educate them on what to do. And I think I've listened to certain things that some coaches say over my years, and it's quite frightening. When I was in Bermuda and I was a technical director there, that was one of the big things that we brought into the National Academy program was, you know, how to eat properly, how to recover properly. And again, I think culturally sometimes, the week before a tournament, you still get these coaches that want to train 2 or 3 times or have another game. So can you imagine if you're that 13, 14-year-old child that plays a game, and if you're 100% nourished in game 1 and you play again at 3, what's your nutrition levels at the game at 3? And then what's your sleeping habits and your eating habits between the next game at 9 tomorrow morning? So by the time game 4 comes around, which is it not the most important game, the final or whatever? And what are these kids? They're almost playing on an empty gas tank. So to me, I'm hoping that talks like this really bring out the need to address this both structurally. You know, I don't agree in playing multiple games in weekends personally, but if that's what we're going to do, we've certainly got to use the knowledge, the data and the science that these guys provide to address those issues at the younger levels.
Marie, one of the things that we hear consistently from everyone that's on the panel today is hydration, nourishment, nutrition. Yeah. Can you just talk a little bit about the science behind that, what it actually means and what Totem's doing to sort of move the needle in that space?
Yeah, so I thought it was really interesting hearing everyone's different, like what they were talking about, especially with Alejandro. And you mentioned that whenever you are hydrating more, that you feel like your recovery is a lot better. So John gave you a little overview about Totem Sport. So it's a 100% natural mineral supplement, and although it's a recovery product, the main benefit of Totem Sport is that it aids hydration at a cellular level. So whilst drinking more water is beneficial, without providing the full spectrum of electrolytes, your cells can't actually hold onto that water you consume. So because Totem Sport provides all 78 minerals and trace elements, that's what actually enables the water to be held in the cell. So without all those trace elements, you can't actually hold the water in the cell. So if you are to drink water and take Totem Sport before, because you're holding more water in the cell, it means that the water has more of a physiological effect in the body. So because your water is working better for you, you therefore get more benefits from the water than you are drinking. And also, it's not just about hydration, but also nutrition. So because each mineral has a role in the metabolism of other nutrients, if you take it before your recovery snack or meal, it actually aids the absorption of other nutrients that you're consuming as well. So it really is not just hydration, but also the nutrition aspect. But the important thing is that it contains the full spectrum of 78 electrolytes. And I think there's not enough out there about minerals and why they're so important, and it often gets neglected. And Derek actually touched on how some players are going from one game to the third game to the fourth game, and they're running on empty by that time. So Tome actually provides a complete mineral supplement that doesn't have the sugar, the preservatives, which all these other supplements contain. So it's really just a very natural product that actually not only supports the player with regards to performance and recovery, but also their health at the cellular level. So really it is the missing link at the minute, and I think there's more being talked about nutrition and hydration, which is amazing, because as John was mentioning, like, the nutrition in food today is just not the same as it was back in the day. So we do need to supplement, but it's getting the right supplements because there's so many out there. But yeah, I think that it's been really interesting hearing everyone's thoughts there.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Alejandro, you've had the opportunity, you had a long career in France before coming back over to the U.S. What have you seen? Are there any differences from a sports science standpoint, or philosophies or methodologies that you noticed that were different abroad than here in the United States?
Well, what I will say, maybe they might disagree with me, but at least from my experience in France, the sports science in the States was a lot more advanced than what I was getting in France at the moment. At that time, they were.
Sorry, John's from Ireland, so he won't mind.
Yeah. No, I think in France, at least, they weren't so keen on the nutritional aspect, in terms of being on top of the players, the athletes, like I get in Philly now here in the States, or even with the national team. They were just very basic. They were the big believers on carbs with pasta and chicken or salmon, and that's what we had, most days. But a lot of things were just about a massage and ice baths for recovery. So we never had they never offered us really drinks or specialized water and stuff like that we had. So I would say from that aspect, that was I think at least my club in France. I can't speak for the whole club, all the clubs there, but we didn't really get the same sports science that I was getting when I was coming back here to the States with the national team and stuff like that. So it's very interesting to see how everything is developing.
Julian, in your current role with U.S. Soccer, you spend a lot of time working on the women's side of the game as well. What unique opportunities, challenges does that present to you as someone who works in this field?
One of the, kind of the old cliche of women are not just small men is something that's becoming more and more prevalent, and people are starting to understand. So things like the menstrual cycle. So I guess an example I could give from this year's World Cup, we knew exactly where every single player was on their menstrual cycle throughout the entire World Cup. And depending on what phase they're in, we then introduced separate and different interventions to help those players manage those things. So whether it was we needed to increase antioxidants through some players had different symptoms, and therefore we could tailor the nutrition and the recovery to try and match the needs of where they were in the cycle to make sure that we minimize the sort of effects of playing, 6-7 games over 3 or 4 weeks, where it may not be in the space of a weekend, but on a senior level with the demands as high as they are at a World Cup, all the little details is what really makes a difference. So.
I had the good fortune of having a coffee with John earlier, and he was telling me a fascinating story about Jermain Defoe and sort of the way that Totem had worked with Jermain Defoe. Do you mind telling that story a little bit?
Yeah, sure. I can tell you about him because he actually gave us a lot of information in writing. But Jermain played for Sunderland, I think it was about 3 or 4 years ago, our last big player.
Yeah.
When he came first, he came from Canada, and when he came first, the first couple of months, he was kind of just bedding in, and he wasn't really making the team. And I happened to meet him, and we put him on taking Totem Sport. And he followed it strictly, the strict regime that we gave him. Now, I will say Totem Sport is not the answer to everything. It's actually the building blocks. It's where everything else, as Mary said, works. So Jermain for the whole year that he was taking Totem Sport, he has told us that he was able to play the Christmas and Easter program in the Premiership. His words, standing on my head. And he could do it better than he did 5 years earlier when he was with Spurs. He also went through the whole season without getting the flu, without getting any illnesses. And of course, he got recalled back to the English team. Now, Totem was, as I said, it was the starting blocks. It was that gave him cellular fitness, and his diet then was very important after that, and his training and everything else. So just because you take Totem Sport doesn't mean you're going to become, win the marathon or whatever. But you have to add more to it. But that's another, if I may, another iconic sports person, Rafa Nadal. Next time if you do watch him, you will see him pick up a Totem Sport in the middle of his matches, and he takes this. As a matter of fact, it's known in Spain as Rafa's magic potion. It was on the back of the newspaper, but he takes it for cramp. So everybody's different reasons for taking it, but he takes it for cramp and recovery, because tennis, you need to recover after every set. I mean, you don't get time to sit down for an hour after you spend an hour playing. And he uses it for recovery and also for cramp. So there's two.
Oh, that's fantastic. Derek, you work in this space every day. If you had to point out one particular area of player performance, optimizing recovery, that was in need of, say, further technological advancement, what would you say that is?
In terms of education of coaches and players, I think people explain to them how the body works. I think, as I said, that's where it comes back to coaching education. Coaches hold so much power in young players, and I'm familiar with certain technologies that work in terms of recovery and stuff like that. But in sort of growing academies now, sports science is becoming more prevalent. Okay, I think it's the level below that, because by the time the kids come into these high-end academies, and I think we mentioned it earlier, it's down to the individual. The influences that these young children have on them. So to me, I think that I would like to see a lot more promotion of it. I'd like to see a lot more education in it, and maybe there's a need for governing bodies to sort of put some more stringent restrictions on how much young players play, or that maybe how many tournaments they can attract all the time, so that at least if we're not totally readdressing it, we're not hampering the problem for doing that.
And just quickly to Alejandro. Alejandro, is there, similar question to that, but is there a particular area of your regular routine, your sort of philosophy when it comes to recovery that you look at it and say, maybe this is an area that could get better, or maybe this is an area that we could work on or improve on? Is there a particular space that you can identify there?
Well, yeah, just before I answer that, I think just to piggyback off what you just said, I think the coaching of these youth coaches and the coaches that are coaching these teams, I think education is key, because you see it's already kind of gone out the window, but a lot of old school maybe coaches will more, it'll be like about mentality, and, they don't really care about the nutrition, because, for example, at my club, we have a pretty good academy, but you see a lot of these young kids coming up, and before training, none of them are eating breakfast. Some of them are not even eating breakfast. So it's like, how are you going to be able to perform at a high level if you're not eating breakfast? But that just comes from being, that's what they're used to. So it's just coaching them, and even the academy coaches and their parents too, to just, you need to be properly, nutrition and hydrated and everything before you come in every morning, and if you want to work at a high level. But yeah, in terms of myself, how I envision technology, I guess, we've already started. We have at our club, we have hydration tests every other day, just to make sure that all the players are hydrated. We have about once a month, kind of a blood test, and it shows you, player by player, what you lack in a certain nutrition and what certain vitamins, certain minerals. And with that in mind, and the sports scientist there, he'll give each player kind of a program, a meal program, so you can be nutrient rich, become nutrient rich again, or get that ability to eat the proper foods, or whatever the proper foods are that are going to enable you to get those nutrients and stuff. So I think, you know, like he said, it's going to become more stringent. It's going to be more individual player focused. But, you know, like I'm still not there yet. You know, like I said, I mentioned for me, what's worked for me is, you know, the big M word for me is moderation. I'm still able to eat whatever I kind of want. And recovery, you know, I think sleep is a big issue too, you know, for a lot of players because, you know, after games, especially when we play these 3 games a week or we have these tournaments with the national teams, you got short days of rest and sleep is important. But after games for a player, you know, from my experience, a lot of us, we deal with adrenaline. You know, you're still high off the game and it's tough to go to bed. But I will say a glass of wine works wonders for me, but there's got to be another solution than just wine. That's where Totem comes in, I guess.
Julian, one of the things that's, I think, unique to a national team setup is there's some extreme travel demands. Right?
Yeah.
You're flying all over the world and you're going to different places, and that inherently puts increased stress and increased demand on a body, especially a body who's looking to perform at the highest athletic level. What do you guys do from a sort of a specific individual tailoring standpoint to mitigate the effects of extreme travel?
Again, as Alejandro like alluded to, every player is different. Every player's needs are different. I mean, from a travel standpoint, I think we worked out last year we had some players who travelled just with the league demands as well, up to I think it was maybe 85 to 100,000 miles in the air flying around, and so little things like that. Okay, how can we prepare for that? So every player now receives a travel kit. So you've got the antiseptic wipes to wipe down all your console. You've got your hand sanitizer, packets of different supplements to help your immune system, things like that. So okay, they're going to have to fly. It's going to happen. What can we do to minimize any potential risks of illness or anything like that when we're traveling so much? And then again, putting in strategies around that. It's like, okay, if we're going to travel in, when are we training relative to that travel? How are we going to adapt to the time zones? Are there plans that we can put in place before we travel? So again, it's breaking it down. Different players respond in different ways. It all sort of builds in, like you're talking about, sort of the blood panels. Again, okay, if this is what this player needs, it's going to be different from what this player needs. So again, how can we individually tailor to get to that fine issue that at the end of the day, it's inches that sort of are the set difference between winning championships and not. So as much detail as we can put into it and as much different ways, strategies that we can put in place, the better, really.
Marie, if you don't mind, when we look 5 years ahead, 5 years from now, what will this landscape potentially look like? Where is it heading, and what's kind of on the cutting edge?
Yeah, well, as everyone's talked about the need for more nutrition education, I think that is becoming more apparent in clubs. So I think that's definitely going to be a lot more focus on their nutrition, their hydration, how they're sleeping, the different practices that are being put in place and the strategies. And I think it's really important that you pointed out travel, because people don't actually realize how much travel can impact the body. So dehydration is actually a massive problem for people who travel. The food that you have access to, different sleeping patterns, jet lag, it all has an impact on the body. And if you are becoming more aware of that, you can put those strategies in place before those problems do arise. And I think that it's really just about educating people, and the more people are aware of how to enhance their nutrition, optimize their hydration, they can actually implement these strategies into their clubs for their players and make them perform better and recover better.
And Derek, you talked a little bit earlier about the need for coaching education and the need for just general awareness in the space, but how difficult is it to take a 13, 14, 15, 16-year-old boy or girl and teach them good habits from the jump?
It's funny because I'm working with a company now that I'll talk about probably later on in the day that talks about mindset, and I'm informed it takes 60 days to form a habit. So, you know, that continual reinforcement, and, you know, I think in the sort of more advanced academies where you've got access to kids 4, maybe 5 times a week. But in the general running of youth soccer, I think, you know, it's got to be parental education again, and then there's budget constraints, you know, and then there's, you know, everyone's got a busy lifestyle right now, so trying to fit that in. But I think that, you know, when you do go away on these tournaments, these mini weekends, you can start to take control of it. I think that, you know, one of the things we're going to do in Charleston Battery is we're going to introduce a diary. I did the same thing in Bermuda, and it's funny you talk about the sleep component that was there. You know, I was always told as a young man, you know, you've got to get 8 hours of sleep. Young children now probably don't even sleep 6 to 8 hours, and I would even challenge how deep that sleep is. And schools now are starting at 7 o'clock in the morning. Some kids are still doing their training at 8:30 at night. So I don't think it's a quick fix. I think, as I said, it's going to be a long-term project to bring this in. But the fact now that we're sitting in environments like this, talking about this, I think, as I said, the pro and the international players, they're always ahead of the game. I think as we start to filter it down through the structures, and it becomes more habit forming, is what I'm trying to say, then I think that you'll start to see the results, and we won't get some of the extreme stuff that we deal with right now.
And Alejandro, was that part of your success coming up? Was maybe that you developed good habits, or you could go back and tell a 15-year-old Alejandro Bedoya, maybe you should do this slightly differently? What would it be?
Oh yeah, I definitely developed my habits over time. Yeah. Because old 15-year-old me, you know, I definitely had my fair share of, you know, pizzas and fast food and stuff. Yeah. But I've definitely trimmed down on that recently, the past 10 years. Yeah. But yeah, no, I think like he said, you know, it's just kind of getting that from the professional environment. We all have access to this. You know, the money's there and everything, but it's just how can we channel that to, you know, go through all the channels and get to the youth teams. And, you know, the academies now that are here in the States developing, you know, I think obviously they're like a little bit behind the professionals overseas, but at the same time here, the infrastructure's there, you know, the technology's there, innovations is there as well. And I'm seeing that firsthand here at Philly, you know, with our academy there. So, yeah, it's just, you know, I just got to get into those young kids to eat their breakfast and you know, get off their phones a bit and get some sleep. But no, I think I've definitely developed my habits over time, and I've seen, you know, what works, what hasn't worked. You know, I take some advice from these guys too, or from other athletes too. And, you know, there's so much out there, you know, nutritional, you know. I just watched, I don't know if you guys seen a Game Changer, Netflix, plant-based diet stuff. But it's a lot of, like you said, you know, you got to, everybody's body is different, you know. So you got to see what works for you and what doesn't.
So we'll do 2 more questions here, and then we'll open it up to a Q&A briefly. John, I want to ask you, as someone who owns a company in this space, runs a company in this space, awareness seems to be ever increasing, right? Are you noticing that? Are people becoming more and more conscious of the things that are going into their body?
Absolutely. I think awareness of nutrition is just there's a growth worldwide, and I think more traditional medicals, I'm talking about doctors and so on, are now understanding that food is much more important than they ever looked at before. As a matter of fact, 3 or 4 weeks ago, we were at we participated in a conference in London called Food on Prescription, and basically it was just about nutrition and about food and how food will work better and replace some of the other bad habits that people are using. But there's one very important space and one very important thing about performance and recovery, and that's mental wellness. And it's also a space that is totally misunderstood. And even on the winning and losing, remember, you take an elite athlete that spends 4 years training, and a half a second, it's all over. And there's an issue there with mental wellness, and that's a space that has to be highlighted, because it does have a massive effect on performance, especially with young kids coming into the game. That, you know, the more they're aware of how to self-help, how to do things to keep their mental wellness up there, the better it'll be.
I think we could do an entire panel on that conversation alone, for sure. Last question, then we'll open it up to Q&A. It's actually, I'd like to open it up to Julian, Derek, and Marie. If you could just quickly, if there was one takeaway from this conversation that you wanted people to know about performance and recovery in a way that we can get better societally in sport, what would it be?
I think firstly, everyone's different. I think it's trying things, finding out what works for you, coming up with a strategy that works for you. I think coming back to your point about everything in moderation, like, it's okay to have a piece of pizza. Now, might get fired for saying that, but it is everything in moderation. You kind of, as soon as you say no, don't do that to some of these players, like the first thing they're going to want to do is go and eat a whole pizza. So again, if you can create those relationships and that understanding that if you take things in moderation, making sure you highlight the key things, sleep, nutrition, and how important all those things are, then I think as a whole, everybody will start to trend upwards and everything will improve.
Derek?
Yeah, I'd like to think that, you know, again, I've always worked predominantly in my career with young people. So to me, it's that creating a habit, getting some real information of what is good, what is bad. I think the internet's fantastic, isn't it, in many ways, but it can also be very misleading because it's now heavily driven now by people trying to sell their products. So for me, I think just getting the awareness out there of how important it is, how important nutrition, rest, recovery is to performance, and where it fits into the working week would be the one thing that I would like to see take place.
And Marie?
I think it's everyone's sort of addressed that there are so many different factors when it comes to performance and recovery. So it's not just about one element. So it's not just the nutrition, it's not just the training, but it's also the sleep, the mental health. So actually acknowledging all the different factors and putting the right things in place to enhance the player's performance from each different factor, and also that the body is optimized by the cellular level. So if you treat the body at the cellular level, everything else will take care of itself. So they're the two main things for me.
It's wonderful. We do have a couple of minutes if there are any questions from the audience. Just raise your hand. We have a microphone coming through. Don't be shy. Anyone? No questions? All right. Well, thank you very much then. How about a round of applause here for our panelists?